Way. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll welcome everybody to our first joint conference committee today. For anybody who's out there, do we need to take a roll in it? We don't need to take a roll. We need to take a roll in a joint conference committee. That's a first for me. Let's go ahead and take roll.
Thank you. Representative Kinner.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Schwartz. Representative Schwartz.
Are you excusing Representative Schwartz?
Representative Walters.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Excused.
Senator Kinski.
Here.
Senator Steinmetz. Chairman Nicholas. Chairman Perkins.
Here.
You have a quorum.
We'll go ahead today. Like I say, our purpose today is mostly for staff to take us through the amendments and help us understand as we get started. So why don't we go ahead and, Don, we appreciate you and your team being here today. And so why don't we'll turn it over to you and your team, and you guys go ahead and present for us.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The first thing I would introduce is the large tabloid size 11 by 17 Joint Conference Committee summary sheet or summary report. We have additional copies available here, and we can hand them out if anyone is missing theirs. In addition, we also have the full text of the House adopted amendments and Senate adopted amendments, and we can also share those with any member who doesn't have those. At some point in the deliberations, it might be useful to look at the actual language if there's a contention or an unresolved issue. Then a quick point about timing. It is unclear to staff as to what leadership will do with the 2 snow days. We've seen a number of different calendars, which include working on Saturday, this coming Saturday, the following Saturday, or Tuesday and Wednesday after Easter. Under a majority of those schedules, the latest date eligible for conclusion of JCC on the budget is this Friday, March 26th. That would ensure the full 3 days of governor's consideration and a day to override his vetoes. If you do extend this, there are some alternatives. If the legislature meets on Tuesday and Wednesday following Easter, then the Joint Conference Committee on the budget does not need to be completed until next Tuesday. But under a majority of the outcomes, Friday the 26th is really the drop dead day. And by that I mean, if you push it till Monday, it's really not possible for us to prepare the report, prepare the bill, send it down there by midnight on Monday. If you miss the midnight on Monday, you miss the 3 days. He can hold it until after you adjourn, just so that's well understood by the members. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll proceed through the summary report. And the first item is an identical amendment.
What happens if we meet on Saturday?
Yes, if you meet on Saturday, or if you meet on both Saturdays, you could complete the JCC work on this Saturday. And we would still do the JCC report on the floor, as well as the adoption of the budget bill on Monday. So it may be a late night on the floor on Monday in order to go through all of the back and forths for that. But that is a possibility that you could get if you can get an agreement on Saturday. Any other questions about the introductory comment? Mr. Chairman, there are 5 pages of JCC amendments adopted by either the House or the Senate or both. And the first 2 were identical amendments, and they increase the internal investment team for accounting positions in the state treasurer's office and House second reading amendment number 26 and third reading amendment number 1 in the Senate side were identical. And if you wanted to take either of those, you don't have to take action at this time, but it makes no difference which of those two are selected. Now we move into the non-identical amendments, and Senate second reading amendment number 21, Division 1, is a range of amendments that impact a variety of different agencies, and they are highlighted by the fact that these were all JAC actions with some differences between the two sides. The first difference is a $30,000 restoration in the support services for the governor's office. The next item is a change of the funding source, no change in amount, for clean coal technology. The Senate's position is that those should be SIPA funds. The House position is those should be general funds. The next item is from the Wyoming Military Department, a reduction of $150,000 of general fund and an elimination of the footnote both in the military department and dropping down 2 lines, the State Parks and Cultural Resources Division, and removes the funding for that MOU for the State Parks and Cultural Resources to operate the Veterans Museum in Casper.
And Don, remind me, what were the total dollars involved for the Veterans Museum?
Mr. Chairman, it was a higher amount than the 150. I believe it was about $223,000, if my memory serves. 216? Yes, 260.
And those are all one-time dollars just for the transition, is that?
The 150,000?
Just all of the Veterans Museum?
No, Mr. Chairman. The amendment did specify in a footnote that the funds would be included in the next biennial budget.
And how much of that is included?
In fact, it would double, I believe. So the total amount would be $300,000 for the next biennial.
And that's general fund dollars?
General fund dollars, yes. The next item on that list is the Department of Agriculture's. This took an additional FTE reduction and a reduction of $72,922 general funds to align with the governor's recommendations regarding the large-scale inspection program, which the governor recommended elimination of or reduction to. The next item has already been discussed. That's the corollary to the Wyoming Military Department Veterans Museum. And the next item is a reversal of JAC action in the Wyoming Community College Commission, where one additional FTE is restored in this amendment, and the funding is shifted back from general funds. So it is a net reduction of $2,008 of general funds and an increase in school foundation program funding, that's S5, of $108,000.
Mr. Co-Chair. Now, Don, could you walk us through the ARF dollars and the impact of reductions that would happen with regards to UW? And kind of just run us through the dollar amounts and where the Senate sits and where we sit and how where we end up in terms of the 10% reduction.
Sure. So this really jumps to the next item, UW state aid.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
before we go to the next one, Don, Mr. Chairman, Don, on that community college, is that associated with the sleds?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
So Representative Larson's question was, does it relate to SLEDS, which is the longitudinal database system in the Community College Commission? And it is that position. The next item is a reduction of UW state aid by $10 million and an increase in the state aid for community colleges by a like amount, $10 million. In response to Representative or Chairman Nicholas's inquiry, K-12 higher education received approximately $44 million dedicated to higher education in Wyoming. As a condition of receiving those funds, the state is required to maintain support for higher education. And then there is a parenthetical that says it is to include need-based aid, but does not include capital construction and does not include research and development or tuition and fees paid by students. And that maintenance of effort is required to be maintained in fiscal year 2022, which is subject to this budget, as well as the first year of the next biennium, fiscal year 2023. And the requirement is to provide at least proportionate level at the state support for elementary, secondary, and higher education percentage of overall state spending for fiscal years 17, 18, and 19. So it requires states to go do a look back, see how much higher education received in those years, and the proportion in fiscal year 2022 and 2023 must be at least that high. Well,
All state spending, is that all state spending for all purposes? Is it general fund? Is it school foundation program? Is it all combined? Or when it says all state funding expenditures, what is that? Excluding, doesn't count tuition fees, but just help us understand that definition.
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly the quandary we're in. We do not have guidance from, in this case, likely the Federal Department of Education, not the Department of Treasury, which is providing the guidance on the 1.1 billion. So we don't know. And Elizabeth and I, really over the last 3 days, have been developing a variety of scenarios. For example, is major maintenance included as capital construction or not? We presume it is not, because it is part of the operating budget of the university.
So, but I think what I'm asking is on the proportionality, is that what is the state spending proportionate to? I mean, what's the other side of the ratio? We know what this funding for higher education is. What's the other side proportion? I guess that's what you're getting to is exactly what's in. So go ahead. I guess I've interrupted you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I completely agree. So the way I look at it, the denominator, does the denominator of total spending include just general funds? It doesn't say general funds in the language. It says overall spending. So does that include school foundation program? So we ran it both ways, just general fund as well as general fund plus school foundation program. If major maintenance is going to be included in the numerator, meaning the amount that is going to higher education, it should probably be included in the denominator as well, even if that comes from SIPA. There's also an interesting issue, I won't call it a problem, that in fiscal year 2017, the state's federal funds that we received for Medicaid or DEQ or military ran through our general fund. So we cannot disaggregate that. It's just one big pot in one of those 3 look-back years. So we also don't know if it says states' overall spending. Does that mean expenditures or does that mean appropriations? Because the result is pretty different if you use spending versus appropriations. What I can tell you is if we use just the general fund, include major maintenance as operation and not capital construction, and we're getting into hundredths of a percent, but it's hundredths of a percent of a really big number. We believe that the JAC position meets the criteria of the federal requirements for community colleges and has $894,000, let's call it $1 million to spare if you wanted to cut $1 million more for community colleges.
But you can't afford to be wrong that direction. You can't afford to be wrong.
On the
And so if you, and yeah. So anyway, and then what were the base years were 2017 and 2018 or 2017 and 2018, 2019?
17, 18, 19. Mr.
17,
Chairman.
18, 19.
Looking forward to UW, and this is the most conservative approach we could identify. We're still just over $9 million of additional spending over and above the JAC position would be required for the state's maintenance of effort. In other words, and it's not just these most recent cuts. Fiscal year 2018 was particularly or proportionally steeper cuts for UW. UW would need $9 million plus the JAC position. Now, that actually is very close to the House position. Serendipitously, you did not know this calculation because we just did this, but
I don't know, Bob's pretty prescient, so anyway.
the restoration of the step 3 reductions is pretty close. Now, these numbers are not a guarantee. We've run this in.
It's okay, we understand the disclaimer, it's okay.
Okay, we can run this if you include, for example, school foundation program as part of overall spending of the state in the denominator. You would need to add at least $6 million to community colleges off of the JAC position, not off of Senate position, and $21 million off of the JAC position for UW. So that. So we don't know what the guidance will say on
And so
overall spending.
I would assume that if you're excluding capital construction from the denominator, are you excluding it also from the numerator?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason for this big bump to 21 million for UW, 6 million for community colleges is you have that K-12, which has just not experienced the same reductions as general state aid. So that denominator is larger. So the miss on the percentage becomes more significant. One more comment before we leave this. We did all of this analysis based on the printed copy of the bill. Of course, when you change any other agency, it also changes the computation. So we haven't gotten to this yet in our summary, but Department of Health, I know there have been some conversations about Department of Health and potential restoration. I mean, both sides had some restoration. Every time you add back cuts, you're adding back cuts that make the comparison for higher education worse, right? Because if you're restoring cuts for social services and not restoring them for higher education is taking a disproportionate cut. So every dollar you add back to another agency puts more pressure on the maintenance of effort for the higher education. Two more comments.
If you get too crazy about it, pretty soon it doesn't do any good to take the 44 million.
Mr. Chairman, that was one of the two comments I had remaining.
Can't afford the sale price.
There is a point where it no longer becomes worth it to take the 44 million. Last point I will mention is
Haven't had this much fun with math since second grade.
the higher education maintenance of effort and the K-12 maintenance of effort are not the only two maintenance of efforts in that bill.
Yeah.
There are key little pieces there for particular programs in the Department of Health, for example, not the whole department, but a particular program has a maintenance of effort requirement. So it is challenging. It does appear that for instance, higher education, there is a waiver process. So states can appeal to the Federal Department of Education and request. Mr. Chairman, that's a separate issue. That's on a maintenance of equity requirement, which I don't believe comes into play here, but you can appeal your maintenance of effort if there are, some external reason that is justified. Let's say the property taxes of local jurisdictions were up sufficiently high that.
What about moratoriums on drilling? Okay, anyway.
Anyway, the higher ed is fairly complicated. We do think there's a path forward in between the two positions, but it's very close to the House position, and it's only under the most conservative definitions that we could identify.
And the real problem is we don't know. We're not going to have a hard answer until
We're gonna have to.
mid-May or June.
Well, and we want, the answer to this question is?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's 30 to 60 days. So at the earliest, mid-April, at the latest,
And
late May.
so speaking of timing though, I mean, of the 44 million, is it all this year or is it spread between the next couple of years? I mean, that's the other thing with the America Recover Act plan is that it doesn't all land this year. Some won't be till next year.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. So the 1.1 billion is made in two payments. I believe that is correct for the 44 million as well, but I'll have to double check that.
Okay.
So what's your best guess on, does the 44 million have to be combined over 2 years or 3 years or?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's available for a period of time. I think it's available until September of 2023 is the end date for those funds, which is also different from the December of 2024 for the 1.1 billion.
And so is the test, is it you meet the test the first time you're in, or do you have to meet the test when you go to the application of the payments, assuming they're separated by a year?
Mr. Chairman, I think you have to meet the test at least twice because it's for
Twice.
FY22 and for FY23. So next year, if the legislature, really wanted to reduce community colleges by $10 million, if you wanted to do that, you would actually be reducing them 10 million and recognizing you will need to give back or pay back a portion of the $44 million.
So is it common for them to do this type of tie-ins, or maintenance of efforts in these type of grants?
Mr. Chairman, I think Senator Kinski, Representative Larson would agree. It's very common in social services and K-12. I'm not as familiar with it in higher education.
So, Mr. Chairman. And Don, so if you take that infusion of federal money, is that counted then as state aid moving forward? Would that come into a calculation as to be accounted for in any maintenance of effort or anything moving forward? Or could you pull those federal dollars out and say that those were supplemental funds? Am I making any sense there?
Mr. Chairman, I think I understand the question, and I believe that this maintenance of effort is only for 2 years. It is not ongoing. I'm not aware of it. It's being tied to anything, and I don't believe that it is included in any state spending computation going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. I was looking at you.
Okay, I got distracted. Anyhow, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not familiar with maintenance of equity. Is it just as simple as it sounds, or is there hidden conditions?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, there's a number of provisions, unlike the maintenance of effort, which is really one paragraph. There are a number of conditions on the maintenance of equity. I would say the general theme there is to prohibit states from reducing either institutions or particular school districts that have a disproportionately poor or high poverty or high free and reduced lunch population.
Okay. Keep going.
Mr. Chairman, that takes us to the Department of Education school support. The Senate amendment reduced $70,000 and returns to the governor's recommendation to reduce the talking books program in vision outreach services.
So, Mr. President,
Mm-hmm.
so we have to have, so then we're going to need those specific numbers with a cushion in the next day or two for community colleges and higher education to just, because those are going to be basically where we're going to go right to as part of our conference committee. So will you have those printed up for us so we can?
Well, it's a chicken and an egg problem, though. I mean, because
The total cuts. You mean.
yeah, like what what you do in Department of Health has a bearing on some of these other things because those numbers are big enough. So, I think what you're going to have to do, Dawn, is when you figure that number to give us back, you're going to, and this is not a concession, but you're going to have to figure as though there's a full restoration of Department of Health to make sure that'll make sure, as you can compute that number, just assume there's a full restoration of Department of Health. So when you're doing the proportionality analysis, in that way, we'll have that. I think that's how you get the cushion.
Well, Mr. Cocho, don't we need a perspective? Because it might just be an education, not the entire basket.
No, it's proportional. It's going to be at least general fund. It's going to be proportional. So it's one affects the other.
Yes.
And I'm not advocating one way or the other, but one approach to this. You are sufficiently close with the JAC position with essentially anything you do on community colleges. If you use the general fund only as the base and you take the House position on UW, you are close, but not under every scenario. So if you include school foundation program, you could.
So you do it, then we'll charge you ahead. If we step on a necktie, you'll let us know.
And you could either in this bill, particularly with a free committee, because this is potentially outside, or another bill, and I think there are other bills out there, you could appropriate a pot of money, I'll call it X million dollars, to be expended for the sole purposes of meeting the maintenance of effort for higher education, or you could expand that to include Department of Health if you wish. And say, okay, in the state auditor's office, kind of like our LSRA set aside for group insurance. We didn't know exactly what was going to happen with the increase in rates and usage and whatnot, and you set a pot of money aside for that purpose. If the committee wants, you could set a pot of money aside and say, this shall only be expended for the purpose of meeting the maintenance of effort to maximize federal receipts under the American Rescue Plan. You can also give it, return it too. I'm not.
You can have contingent agreements. Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, the next two items relate to the budget balancers.
Yeah.
And this is a reduction that the Senate took to two school capital construction projects. One in Washakie County for Tensleaf Elementary, I believe, and another in Fremont County for the Riverton High School Auditorium. By reducing those amounts, the subsequent $10.7 million reduction is a reduction of the SIPA funds, which would no longer need to be transferred. So that's kind of a two-part amendment. One, reducing the two projects, and two, reducing the transfer. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the last component of this was to strike existing Section 339 for the Casper State Office Building Advisory Task Force and the $20,000 appropriation associated with that group. The next item is a separate amendment on the House side only, and the House side restored $2,034,000 and added a footnote for fiscal year 22 only for continuation of the veterans tax exemption. There was legislation, I don't believe that has moved forward, but that legislation would have modified the veterans tax exemption. But even if that legislation was successful, it would not have impacted fiscal year 2022 because of the delay in property taxes.
And Don, with that, do we have a spreadsheet that has the impact per county of where that 2 million would go?
Mr. Chairman, we don't. We could probably get last year's payments by county.
There's been discussion that we could have the counties cover it because they have COVID dollars or ARF dollars, however you want to say it. But we want to know how much it would be and what that impact would be to each county, just to understand what the impact would be if that's the case.
I'm certain we can get that. And I will pause there. Counties received a sizable proportion of the ARP funds. The next amendment for your consideration is House Third Reading Amendment number 1. This is no longer effective because House or Senate File 150, which was a repeal of the death penalty, was not enacted. So even if you adopted this, nothing would happen on the budget. Page 2 at the top is House Second Reading Amendment number 28. This is a restoration of JAC's reductions of 2 FTE in the law office of the AG, amounting to $228,000. Third Reading Amendment number 5 is language only, applies to the State Parks and Cultural Resources Division.
Don, excuse me for interrupting again. On number 6, can you remind us how many positions were cut out of the AG's office? And I think total and then just attorneys.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I want to be correct here. I thought it was 9, but a total reduction of 13, and you are restoring 2. Not all of those were lawyers. Some of them were criminal investigators.
So 13 FTEs.
13 FTEs, and you're restoring 2, which are lawyers. Item number 7 is the language on the State Parks and Cultural Resources to prohibit general fund appropriations expended for news services, and it makes an exemption for public broadcasting or advertising or public notices. House Third Reading Amendment number 4 is a restoration of 1 position that was reduced by Joint Appropriations Committee. It is partially paid for by a decrease of $16,755 in travel budget in the administration division of state parks, and restores that $90,000 position in the cultural resources division. House Third Reading Amendment number 14 is a fund swap, taking 1 year, which would biennialize, from general fund funding for interstate streams division in the state engineer's office to funding from the water development account 1. Senate Second Reading Amendment number 7 and House Second Reading Amendment number 7, again coincidence that they were numbered similarly, are almost identical. They're very similar. Both of them restore footnotes 1 and 2 for study of by the Wyoming Geologic Survey, those special aeronautical as well as rare earth, I'll call it, studies.
Don, going back to number 9, on the payment of the Interstate Streams Division. Do you recall what the history is of when that was, if that was ever paid for out of Water 1 or Water 2 accounts? And if so, for how long?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I believe we worked on this, and I'd be corrected by my staff. I believe in the 1980s, 1990s, and up until 2005, it was paid for by Water Development Account 1. And beginning in 2005, it was shifted over to general funds. It has been general funds since. And I believe
generally the amounts that go to Water 1, how has that increased in terms of water dollars available to them through that period of time?
Mr. Chairman, I would describe it as fairly stagnant because these are under the cap severance taxes. So their revenues have arguably been capped.
We moved some portion, we moved the border control,
Yes.
moved some border control and some of that under there a year or two ago too, right?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. You moved the Board of Control, which is by far the largest division in the state engineer's office. And I believe that was moved over in the last biennium.
Mr. Chairman. Don, on that water one where you referred to that being under the cap, and by virtue of the constitutional tip, that actually grows every year. Is that fair to say, or am I not seeing that right? So well, I guess it depends some on the revenue generated from the PMTF, but where that's under the cap, that's getting a direct appropriation and would, because that corpus is growing each year, it would seem to me that that amount would grow as well.
Mr. Chairman, these are actually severance taxes, not investment income.
Severance tax, thank you.
Yeah.
That's the first 250, right?
Is the first 200,
Mr.
or
Chairman,
is it the first 150?
150.
It's the first 150, yeah. First 150
So
million.
first 150.
Of that with severance taxes,
Thank
there's
you.
a carve out.
Don, do we know in terms of the Board of Control, I'm sorry, not the Board of Control, but the Interstate Streams Division. I'm curious what just that entity or division, what their costs have been. In other words, has it
Okay.
grown? And is it more expensive now than it was in 2005 or 2020, 1990s, that type of thing? In other words, this would have a bigger drawdown than what was in the past. I'm just curious.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that off the top, but we can look into it. Hearing no further questions, I described the studies were approved on both sides for the Wyoming Geologic Survey. What was not approved on the Senate side was the funding. The House put $130,000 and 1 FTE to manage those studies in its version of the amendment. House Second Reading Amendment number 35 begins a discussion of healthcare financing in the Department of Health. Stepping back, this is a roughly $18 million restoration using LSRA funds of largely step 3, but there is at least one step 2 item related to the cuts experienced by the Department of Health. These relate to out-of-home placements, units, optional adult services in the Medicaid program, including vision, chiropractic, dental services. It also includes the largest portion is for the comprehensive waiver unit. And then all of these amendments remove the amounts from the standard budget of the Department of Health, but direct the department to submit exception budget from general funds for the next biennium.
So Don, explain then the 18 million, then next biennium, if the biennializes, will go to 32 million, right?
Mr. Chairman, that would be my expectation with one exception, I believe, and the one exception is there was a step 2 reduction that would be sustained, not biennialized. That's a rather modest amount compared to the 18.
The Senate has 9 million roughly, I think. Or what's that number? Because we were trying to find that.
It's about 8.
Mr. Chairman, I think the Senate is about $8 million, a $2.4 million restoration of the comprehensive waiver, and then a $6 million, which was taken from, or which was shifted from the University of Wyoming's block
So
grant.
my next question is, explain again, I think you mentioned it before, but if the bigger the cuts we make to health, the more that impacts UW cuts as well, right? Because it's the total dollars expended.
Yes, but I would kind of shift that
The
and
other
say
way.
the more you restore,
The more you restore, the more you have to restore to UW.
if you cut them more, it would give you more room to cut other entities.
So with the house side, restoration, is that the calculation? Have you made that calculation and how it impacts UW?
Mr. Chairman, we have not, although I think if Elizabeth has that spreadsheet, she could add 18 million to the total GF line and see how
I mean, are there big enough dollars that will,
it would change the $9 million UW restoration. And I'm totally guessing here, but maybe 150,000, something like that.
Oh, and going back to that whole thing on the ratio of what we do in the Department of Health and how it affects UW, when we do total spending, is it $2 for most of the stuff in the Department of Health because there's a federal match, or is when we expend federal dollars, is that part of state spending? A good question.
Mr. Chairman, that is a great question. It says state spending, but what is odd is in our accounting system, they are commingled.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it seemed like spending is different than source of funds. You're spending it on state things, but your source may not. Even though you're spending it on one thing, your sources could be different, including federal or tobacco or.
Mhm.
In your spare time.
and we won't know that till May, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we may have to tweak, with long and short of it is we may have to tweak this during the special session.
So, Mr. Chairman, and so Dawn, on the House side where there's 18, I know you're not conceding, but just for numbers, if that 18 moved back in, that could influence the department or the university by a guess of 150. But on that next line down, if we reduce that step 2 fund, that the Senate's position was as a restoration and kept that as a cut, would that impact that number back down?
Mr. Chairman, it would still be a net increase.
Okay.
Bigger.
But a lesser net increase. By 6 million. By 6 million.
Good save, Lloyd.
By 6 million.
So, Mr. Chairman, let me make
Go
sure.
ahead, Mr.
The bigger the healthcare cuts, the less we need to restore UW and vice versa. The fewer cuts to healthcare, the more we need.
Yeah,
to
they
restore
move in the
UW.
same direction. They're linked. They move in the same direction.
But if 18 million only impacts 150,000, it's not.
Mr. Chairman, I did misspeak, so I want to give a better assessment. It changes a lot more than I thought. An $18 million change to the Department of Health has $2 to $3 million change on the university. So it is and I guess that makes sense because that's 1/6.
It's the block grant, $250 million against the 1.8 billion. That's the ratio.
So if we restore 18 million to the Department of Health, we have to restore 3 million.
3 million to the
UW.
university, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we just got to keep that in mind. We got to.
6. Drew, is that, Chairman, did you say it's 1 to 6 or about?
Roughly. 18%. Mr. Vice President?
Is that 18 million back to the Department of Health, is that above and beyond?
Oh, we're just talking about ratios and about the maintenance. We're not talking about, what happens is under ARP, you have to maintain proportionality of expenditure. And so anytime you affect, particularly the Department of Health, because that's where such big numbers are, that that affects the proportion of state spending. And so you have to keep those in proportion if you're gonna take advantage of some of the ARP funds. And so that's just what the discussion is. We're not discussing a green Indian, we're just trying to figure out the relationship between the two and what the effect of restoring or not restoring dollars has on the ARP money.
Do we know what those numbers are at this point in time?
Well, we just know there's no, the answer, long and short of it is, yeah, which numbers? There's those multiple scenarios because it's not clear enough of what state spending is, whether it's appropriation or actual expenditure. It's not sure. We have some guidance on what you include in state spending and what you don't know what you don't. So we're just trying to anyway, it's just part of the discussion. We're moving to three-dimensional.
It's really fun to explain this to Loris.
Yeah, we're moving to three-dimensional chess all of a sudden, so it's going to get fun. So keep going.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're on the public health restoration, $750,000 there. I'm still in House Second Reading Amendment number 35. And this is related to the immunization program, $4.1 million restoration, 100% LSRA funding. And this is for the senior care unit and the home community-based waiver for the seniors. YHIS, I think, is the acronym. And then the last item there is the Department of Family Services, Assistance and Services. These are 4 programs restoring a 6% reduction to the providers for things such as adoption, guardianship, residential treatment centers, and group homes. Moving on to the Senate Second Reading Amendment number 20. This is related to the one immediately preceding it, where the Senate elected to restore $6.5 million for the comprehensive waiver unit. That's the waiver for persons with developmental disabilities. And this is funded by a reduction of a like amount from the University of Wyoming State Aid.
And Ron, I believe that was a step 2 reduction that they restored. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. House Third Reading Amendment number 8 is really just a technical correction to the Senate position previously discussed. This was the Beitman Amendment, and it would clarify that the $6.5 million increase is one time. House Second Reading Amendment number 9 was separate from the $18 million. This was a Representative Larson amendment, which provided $225,000 for high-risk infant care, those infants with the most severe and medically challenging activities. Senate Third Reading Amendment number 7.
So Don, if it's a one-time payment, then anytime we have a one-time payment like that, and then we go to the next biennium and we have to reapply, then that would impact the ratios, right?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And unfortunately, the way I read this, we're going to have to play the three-dimensional chess games for 2 years.
2 years, right. So even if you restore it one time this year, you're effectively almost locked into doing it for at least one more. Or give the money back. Okay.
Senate Third Reading Amendment number 7 relates to the aging division. It restores $1.3 million specific to the Wyoming Home Services program. So on the House side, the total restoration for this program was 4.1 million.
4.124.
And on the Senate side, it's $1.37 million for the same program. Senate Third Reading Amendment number 19 and House Third Reading Amendment number 25 are nearly identical. It includes the 3 technical corrections, an apostrophe, an underline, and a more substantive item related to swapping of major maintenance funds from the general fund to SIPA. The only difference there is the Senate version needed to insert a $sign from a prior amendment. So depending on how you address that amendment, you can probably either take the Senate or the House.
We didn't think it was dollars.
House second reading amendment number 10, item number 19, relates to clarifying language, no money, on the transition of the Wyoming Women's Council between the Department of the Business Council and the Department of Workforce Services. This would bolster the language in terms of the standard budget amounts that is included in next biennium, and also ensure that any funds that the Wyoming Business Council has remaining from this appropriation are also transferred to the Department of Workforce Services, not just the amounts under the MOU. So there's no incentive for them to.
So that it's not a dime more of money or like dime less. It's just a little bit of a turf battle about who controls the money. Right?
Correct.
Okay.
House second reading amendment number 39. This is the restoration of the state aid amounts for both community colleges and the University of Wyoming. This related to a governor's letter restoring step 3 cuts. This just happens to be that $9.1 million.
That 9 million that if you get there, that gives us the cushion.
And if,
Depending on what we do in Farmville.
yeah, right, but if we do Department of Health, then this may have to go up another 3 million.
Mr. Chairman, and it's not just the Department of Health. As previously discussed, if they redefine what state spending is, it changes the calculation.
And with respect to higher education look at that, it's the combination of the UW and the community colleges. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Or not?
that's a great, I am hesitant to share this, but we ran it combined as well as separately because we're not sure whether or not, and if it's combined because colleges were a little overfunded according to the formula, UW was underfunded. The transition is about $8 million because it's a combination of $1 million additional cut from community colleges, 9 million more spending for UW. So we're only, if you look at it for the higher education system in total, we're closer to meeting that maintenance of effort.
We're closer to what?
Meeting it.
Meeting
How much closer?
$1 million.
Okay, keep going.
But if we,
Go ahead.
how does that impact it if we add the Senate component, add 10 million more to the community colleges?
Mr. Chairman, I think that is a great point.
I don't know that it does anything because we raised 10 and went down 10. So the net effect on higher education is 0 if they're combined. If they're not combined, then it does.
Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, the next item is number 21. It relates to the Office of State Lands, Senate second reading amendment number 18, provided $325,000 and specified that the funds be used for compliance, environmental assessment, appraisals for potential land exchanges in the Medicine Bow or near the Medicine Bow or Teton National Forest.
And you guys killed that bill the other day, right?
Yes.
So we need to probably remove the Teton language here in this one potentially, but we can talk about that. Anyway, go ahead.
House second reading amendment number 12, Division 1, provided $500,000 that the governor had reduced for noxious weeds on state lands.
How much was left in there?
Mr. Chairman, it was 100% cut
It was 100% cut. All right.
and 100% restoration.
Thank you. Oh, page 4.
House third reading amendment number 9, which is item number 23, provided $4 million from the SIPA account for matching funds in the ratio of 2-to-1 for cryptocurrency to the University of Wyoming. This is to provide publicly tradable node to facilitate the operations of blockchain at UW.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator, go ahead.
Don, assuming if this 4 million stayed in there, does that count towards the additional millions we'd have to keep in UW for the MOE, or do we know that? It's part of total spending.
Is it capital construction or is it not capital construction?
Right.
Or is
and-
that research?
It's virtual construction.
So we had, for more specification here, we do remove endowments from the model. We do not remove matching funds. So athletics stays because that money is being spent, but a deposit into a faculty endowment, which you have done back in 16 and 17, we did not consider that to be quote unquote spending. I think unless this is for research and development, I don't believe it qualifies under capital construction. I believe it would count towards overall spending at higher ed. That's
and Don, what that really is it helps provide the computer system and the research facility for blockchain, and all the stuff about the nodes and the staking pools is secondary, but it actually is a way that can pay for the entire increase in this infrastructure, in this computer infrastructure, for this IT infrastructure, essentially to help research blockchain and further the efforts of the university. The staking pools are just a convenient way you can make some money doing these staking pools for cryptocurrency to help pay for it. So I really think it's in the nature of R&D more than anything else.
So that would not count.
And and I think from your earlier comments is that what on state spending, R&D and capital construction are excluded.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, does it add a nuance to this where we require it to be paid back?
Yeah, I guess it's a loan, so maybe it's
Yeah,
not spending at all.
that's right.
It may be in the nature of a loan.
Don, how risky is the loan?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the discussion because it illustrates the lack of information as to how they will interpret the law. What does research and development mean? Based upon what the chairman has just said, I think it would fall in that research and development. And we have excluded, for instance, the CCUS that was approved last year for the School of Energy Resources. We counted that as research and development.
What's CCUS?
Carbon capture and
Okay.
The next item is $15.5 million in SO, that's also known as revenue bonds, to the University of Wyoming, authorization to issue those bonds for the acquisition of the Bison Run Village Apartments. Item number 25 is House Second Reading Amendment number 17, the Department of Corrections. The House side restored 6 FTE and $373,000.
so going back to the 15.5 million, if we're guarantors, if we're guarantor of a university, there's another one for you to noodle on there, Don.
Item number 26, Senate Third Reading Amendment number 16, and House Third Reading Amendment number 23, adjacent to that as line number 27. These are very similar. This is just a high-low for an LSRA budget balancer. As adopted, neither of these two come into play, and both of them could go away. However, it's nice that they are now available, depending upon how the work of the Department of Health and Higher Education amendments are resolved. And by that, I mean, if you take the high point of the House side for spending on higher education and some of the Senate amendments on the comprehensive waiver, these budget balancers could come into play.
Why we have them?
House Third Reading Amendment number 18 is a fund transfer from the State Penitentiary Capital Construction account, of which there is $20 million or $20.5 million currently, and an estimate of an additional $10 million deposit at the end of this fiscal year. Both of those both of those items total to $30.5 million, and that total amount would be transferred to the school capital construction account under this amendment. Senate second reading amendment number 21, Division 2, is very similar to the item number 30, House third reading amendment number 27. This is the distribution of the OPSTA account, where the Senate position is 50% to the PMTF, 50% to LSRA, which was the same position as the adopted law from last year. The House position is 50% to the PMTF reserve account, 50% to the Common School Permanent Land Fund reserve account. I would also mention there is other legislation, two pieces of other legislation that conflict with this, and one of them does have a superiority clause.
What bills are those?
You'll get that one. That's 121. Senate File 121. You should show up today or tomorrow and you're down to your end. That's a harsh one bill.
Page 5, items 31 and 32 are very closely related. In fact, they're both Senator Ellis amendments for the development of an education programs advisory task force. The appropriation of $38,000 from the general fund supports both the legislators and non-legislators on the task force. The subsequent amendment in third reading number 12 merely changed the name to be consistent throughout the amendment to task force from committee. The term task force is used when there are non-legislators participating. Senate third reading number 18 is again a placeholder as I view it for the CARES Act funding. And it specifies a potential priority list of known projects that were available at the time, and specifies which of those, and it includes all of them that were known at the time, would be eligible for COVID, and that's the old CARES Act money, not the new ARP money.
Yeah, and we've also got, was it Senate File 118, which,
And House Bill 260.
and also 260 deal with those two. So we got lots of moving around in there. We got lots of places to fix that, so. Okay.
Items number 34 and 35, let's take Senate third reading amendment number 13, which deleted and restated Senate second reading amendment number 15. This relates to the carbon capture and carbon capture utilization and storage.
Mhm.
The Senate position perfected their amendment to appropriate $10 million to the governor's office. The next line, House second reading amendment number 23, appropriates that money to the Wyoming Energy Authority. I think LSO legal staff suggested some additional public purpose statements in the Senate position. House second reading amendment number 22 imposes a maximum reserve account balance and changes that in statute only for the period of the biennium from 150% to 225%. That first amendment, second reading amendment number 22, increased that for the PMTF reserve account and the Common School Permanent Land Fund reserve account. Then third reading amendment number 11 added the same language for the higher education, excellence in higher education endowment, also increasing the maximum reserve account to 225%. And then finally, third reading amendment number 24 came in and fixed all of those up. And now the 225% under the House position would apply to the PMTF reserve account, Common School reserve account, excellence in higher education reserve account, and the Hathaway endowment would also increase its maximum from 4.5% investment income to 9% investment income. One last point on this, the change to the excellence in higher education would also reduce the transfer deposit into the corpus this year, which was planned at approximately $10.5 million, and would reduce that to would reduce the contribution to $5.6 million.
Mr. Vice President?
Real quick on the health of change the spending policy on that. Is that correct?
Yes. It does not change the spending policy, but it changes the maximum reserve amount from 4.5% to 9%. There really isn't a spending policy for that scholarship program. The spending policy is however many qualified applicants present themselves. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, item number 40 is the last item, which provides for a reporting of the efforts related to human resource consolidation. And I would mention that the third B11 implementing that consolidation was just made available yesterday.
Okay. Thank you. You got a couple more minutes for questions? I think that gets us through the list. Members, any other questions? Go ahead.
Chairman. Don, could we go back to that House 35 one we focused mainly there on Department of Health, but then on Department of Family Services on those step 3 cuts, what does that do to that level of spending? Or we've talked about the Department of Health, University of Wyoming, but I didn't know how much those 6% cuts in those 4 units, because there's not a lot of general fund dollars in that agency.
Mr. Chairman, excellent question, and the agency itself really doesn't have a huge impact. It's the proportionality.
Okay.
So it would have a similar impact to the restoration. I think you had 700,000 in the Office of State Lands and Investment for invasive species and the study. All of those increases are going to have a round numbers here, a 1/6 impact on the university or university and community colleges.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator?
So Don, this morning, Representative Larson and I went over with staff the DOH and DFS cuts. If I understand it, besides this proportionality test, there's also an MOE that's applicable directly to those DOH programs as to whether they will or will not be eligible for an increased FMAP. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, if I can get closer. Yes, that is correct. It's primarily related to the Medicaid program. And I believe the Department of Health has stressed the home and community-based waiver programs.
So there's yet another interaction effect in your model, I guess. I don't know, because it's uncertain as to what we actually get out of that. If we put those phase 3 cuts back, it's unclear that we're really going to more than make that money back. I mean, they hope that that's the case.
Mr. Chairman, and Michael, please jump in. As I understand this, it increases the federal contribution or that FMAP rate, not just on the waiver services, but on all Medicaid services. And to the extent we fail to generate that, for example, we would not generate the potential general fund savings. And it is potential, as I understand it. For last calendar year, we received an increase from 50% FMAP to 56.9% FMAP. And I believe the department has calculated that had approximately an $18 million impact. And it was not in place for the full year. It was in place for maybe 8-9 months. So based on that history, maybe it's $25 million for a full year at that enhanced rate. And I believe the enhanced rate under the law would continue through April of 2022. So you might be looking at a potential, and I appreciate the term potential increase in federal funds for those services, maybe as high as 30 million. And correct me, please.
No, Mr. Chairman, Don's right. I know that Department of Health is not certain because they have, again, lack federal guidance specifically, that it could be anywhere between $15 and $40 million. It just depends on what services and how much utilization there is on those services.
Michael, and that was just on the 10%. And then you add the continuation of the 6.2%. I mean, the MOE applies to the 10% that Senator Kinski is reporting about, but then so you would have a shift of general funds to federal funds of that amount. And then we'll carry that 6.2% that we got this last year, potentially through the quarter past when the president says the pandemic's over, right?
Mr.
And
Chairman, that's
so
correct.
that's an additional shift that comes into play on all Medicaid actions.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. There are two separate enhancements. One from the CARES Act 1, which goes until the quarter after the president declares the emergency, COVID emergency over, and then the American Rescue Plan enhancement, which my understanding is the Department of Health believes will be in for 4 quarters, basically from April 1 of this year through April 1 of next year.
So Michael, can you develop the quadratic equation that we need to solve this problem and have that solution to us by tomorrow?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I cannot.
So, Mr. Chairman, and we also looked at a possible language from the department, because another option is you keep the phase 3s in place, but you give the governor the authority to not implement them or to move funds around to maximize the recovery under ARP as more gets to be known about the program. Which is
yeah, and we'll be back to.
Well, which is fairly.
Maintenance of effort, do they include the enhanced FMAP they gave us?
Only because they didn't think. Okay.
So just in broader numbers, for the Department of Health, how does that affect us in that balance? And DFS. You guys come up with numbers of that this morning?
We're getting, well, I think it's Senator Kinski can tell me if his thoughts were different, but my takeaway from what the Department of Health was saying is that all of those home and community-based service waiver programs that have an MOE are in jeopardy of losing the ARP dollars if we make those cuts.
And
Is
so
that fair?
how much, what's the cost of restoring those programs? That's my question. Just
Well,
the ones that have the MOEs.
we'll turn to Michael. He was the
So,
scorekeeper.
Mr. Chairman, it's just the step 3, because the step 2s, well, no, some of the step 2s have not yet been implemented. So there's an open question. If the step 2s were in, if the governor implemented those before April 1 of this year, but the department's still trying to work through CMS and so forth to actually make them effective, do they count or not count? So it may be that not only all the phase 3s would have to be put back, but some of the phase 2s would have to be put back in order to take advantage of what's an uncertain amount of money in response for the department directly. Now, and when we talked this morning, Representative Larson and I didn't know about this additional feedback loop between the spending of the Department of Health and what we've got to do with higher education and whatever other interaction effects there are in this overly complicated federal model.
And we talked about the interaction and spending on the Department of Health, but it also works the other way for the value. It's not as obviously doesn't have a multiplier effect, but more, those things are going to work together. You could, if you isolate and spend them in a university, it will affect some of the issues in potentially the Department of Health. If there's any proportionality, is there proportionality in the Department of Health? Is there a proportionality requirement?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with the proportionality requirement, but to the earlier question, the amount of restoration, at least on the House side, would be about $14 or $15 million. The step 2 reductions for Department of Health that Senator Kinski just noted, if you had to restore those as well, based on the positions, it would be about $20 million.
Time to go back to work yet?
It is.
Go to other jobs. Anything else?
So just one more, Don. So in assessing this proportionality with higher education, is it total DOH, DFS spending or just certain programs like the
Statewide.
hmm?
Statewide, all state spending.
all state spending?
But DFS is such, the Department of Health, Department of
No,
Family Services is such big. Drive. So you're looking at 120, what do we say, 1.8 billion, 0.9 billion, so 250 million.
18%, you said?
No, 6% is
6%.
about, excuse me, 1 to 6 is about 18%.
So Don, are you working on language for the options of creating a pot? Basically to cover, to give the governor leeway? And have we looked at having only a partial budget and finishing the budget on certain things in the special session? Is that an alternative?
To the answer, the first one, yes. I've made that request. And I've sketched out the language for the attorneys to work on. As to the second question, that is really that's a policy choice.
Well, how would we do it? I mean, essentially, we just wouldn't.
Sure you do. You just, we budget with uncertainty every year.
Yeah.
There's no difference.
Well, I mean, structurally, how would we do it? How would we leave certain amounts open or to be determined?
There's a whole range of things, but let me just toss out one. First of all, you don't have to pass a budget this year. I'm not saying that's the wise thing to do, but that's, you don't have, just like certain agencies are not included in here, water development is not included in your budget. You do not have to include other agencies, Department of Family Services, community colleges, UW, et cetera. You could leave them out of the budget. You could revisit them at another time. They would not have any legislative cuts. That's not to say that the governor has not already reduced their amounts in his step 2 reductions. That's not to say he would not continue to reduce them in his step 3 reductions. But there's a range of options that you would have.
But if we leave them out, the governor could give them money back if he chose to, if we gave him the authority. We don't even have to give him authority to do it. Or he can get rid of his step 3 budget cuts in order to, because that's still our overall spending. So
the problem you have, if you don't have at least something done, is the governor has no ability to access these other funds. And he's about, right now, he's about $250,000 short of being able to meet the obligations of the general fund. So we're going, we've got to deal with, so he can't access SIPA without our help. He can't access LSRA to the extent he needs to without our help. We have to do some of that. That's, otherwise we leave the governor hanging now. There's a bunch of money coming in, but if we don't, the other thing that happens too is that I'm afraid if we don't do a budget and we're not careful, then I think, then all of a sudden there's some built-in effects on how the MOUs and these levels of spending are in the future. If we, to the extent if we don't make some reductions in there, and even the overall governmental spending, it's going to come back and bite us in 2023 too, I think.
So if we don't have an education bill, how is that going to impact it in terms of that versus, say 60 million in cuts?
I think that the obvious issue there is just like higher ed with their 44 million, K-12 will be receiving $303 million.
Like
on top of
in 2 weeks,
on top of their current formula.
unless you do something.
On top of the prior CARES Act.
Unless they do something.
Correct.
But That's not at risk with the, because that's a 10% issue.
Mr. Chairman, on our
It's going to be good. Look at him smiling.
on our spreadsheet, I cannot come up with a scenario where you violated the maintenance of effort on K-12.
That's the trick question for the day.
So when we have that discussion, thank you. So does that apply to K-12 as a whole, or does that go by district by district?
Mr. Chairman, the language of the act does not mention anything about district by district. It does say condition of receiving funds to maintain support for elementary and secondary education.
Thank you.
So our next question is when we meet next. And then it's also how we're going to be able to track what we do with the impacts of what we do, right? How difficult is that? I mean,
That's what he's asking you, though.
Mr. Chairman, I might be optimistic, but there are a bunch of items here that can be addressed in a relatively short amount of time and have very little impact on. And it would, as soon as you start adopting things, we can start writing language.
Really, the way I see it working is you come in, we do what we can. We have some ideas of how this is going to work. And as we start to do these things, we adopt them. We just have to recognize we're going to have to come back and revisit what the Joint Conference Committee is doing, because once we make some adoptions and we figure out where we're at, then they can go and help us figure out those numbers. We'll come back and we can refine it. So it's just, it'll have to be on a little bit of a loop to get it refined, but we have to get to our work and do our work so that they can have time to crunch some numbers.
So what are you thinking tomorrow?
Well, yeah, we need to get on this tomorrow. I mean, so we've got a bunch of referrals and we got to finish up. We got several referrals we got to do tomorrow, but we don't have to, we can, I just as soon get started. What I'd just as soon to get is see if are we scheduled for morning? So what we have to do, we've got 4 or 5 referrals we need to kick out tomorrow because they're all House bills. We got to get those back out on the floor. We've got to take care of our brothers down the hall, sisters down the hall. So we can do that. My suggestion would be is that we meet in the morning. We do in the morning, then we can regroup and then we either, I think we will let's do our referrals at noon. Well, let's do our referrals in the morning. And then why don't we do our referrals in the morning so we can get those back out and they can be on committee the whole tomorrow.
All right, so we'll do our 3 re-referrals in the morning and then we'll have joint
And then
conference
why don't
committee.
we go ahead and.
So I'm more inclined to meet tomorrow on adjournment. And that way we can spend more time on it. And
There's a bunch of items we can knock out in a short time. We go after the language issues first. We can do a bunch of all that.
well, that's true. We could, if you want to just deal with all the.
Why don't we
little
just
things.
at noon and if we find anything, if we get hung up on it, we'll just move on. Noon.
Well,
and then we can
yeah, let's meet at
respond.
noon because we'll meet in the morning. We'll kind of, once again, go through it all and kind of develop what we can do. And we'll be better prepared if we do it then.
Okay, so we'll meet at, start at noon and an adjournment. That'll be our plan for tomorrow. So work for you?
Michael? Can I visit?
Long days.
Can I visit?
Longer.
What were you saying?